Добре, я всіх вас рада вітати
Okay,
на
so I'm pleased to welcome everyone at our webinar. And as always, traditionally, our webinar is going to be dedicated to a very important topic, and we're going to be talking to our partners and friends. We're going to be talking to the international financial institutions. Those are the organizations that have been helping Ukraine for multiple years to support the reforms, to finance our developments, and helped us to become a better country during the wartime. Their support is very important for us. So that is why we really wanted to discuss it today with our panelists all together on what impact does it have. Our event has been supported by the Open Society Foundation and with the support of the International Foundation Renaissance. So I would like to invite our distinguished speakers and would like to start with our opening remarks to pass the floor to the person who was responsible
Світового банку в
for
Україні
the
до
development of the
1997
Development Office for the World Bank in Ukraine in 1992 and 1997. The person who's responsible for the governmental institutions reformations,
правління колегіуму
the
Анна
head
Ярославна,
of
Віра
Anna Yaroslavna
Нанівська.
Collegium.
Віра,
Please welcome
хотіла
Vera
б
Nanivska. Vera, please, we would like to ask you to tell us about your experience and what would be the role of the international financial organizations in your point of view, and what would be the role of the government in your point of view. How can we improve their collaboration? And I do believe that you should have the very good answer to that. Yes, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to see all of you today. You know, the first mission of the World Bank has been to come to Ukraine on the 19th of January of 1992. So basically, we were there during this January holidays, and I was working still in Moscow, and that was still about the mobilization of the state policy at that point of time. We have been mobilizing the human resources for the further mobilization of the Ukrainian state. So that was one of the ideas that we worked with. So that was the moment of history. And then the representative of the mission then in Moscow, he has asked me and has asked my colleagues to develop the first mission to Ukraine. And so I'm from Yavoriev, from city where my parents live. I've turned to Kiev for working in the first mission. And so it was basically really hard for us to undermine of what was happened during this mission because the bank has opened for the world a totalitarian, isolated country, and then Ukraine was the exports of the mission. I really felt like aliens. I really felt like you were from the science fiction. So we were working in the unknown universe for the Soviet people. So there was a lot of things that have changed in 2 or 3 years after the Soviet Union. We have opened the most important value of the World Bank at that point and because Ukraine has now the access to the experience of the World Bank. We have started the precedent for the development of our country. It was always held under the Evelyn Hertz um, guidance with the Daniel Kalpa support and the representatives of the first meeting, Ted Art. Throughout this time, we have understood there was not one single way that was right for the further development of Ukraine, and we still have the competition of the ideas. We've had this really hard discussion, an interesting discussion for the future of the post-totalitarian countries that are still impacting the fate of our country. We have been discussing and talking about what should be done further on. Then we know that the vision of SUCS has won, that we didn't work with any kind of institutional reforms. We had a great trauma, and the society still believes that it's a bad source because it stimulated the development of oligarchic impacts. So right now, on the days of Ukrainian-Russian war or even Ukrainian-Soviet war, we're fighting for the Ukrainian new state. And we have now seen some of the problems in Ukrainian reforms. There is the lack of the rule of law and corruption. But it's basically this is catastrophical issues for Ukraine, because throughout the 30 years of the totalitarian countries, the main impact of which was the overall corruption. Now we have turned out that based on the results of the reform, we still out of reforms. What we called reforms then, so were we just improving the situation as it was? So some of the reforms haven't been incomplete, and we didn't have the judicial or constitutional reforms completed. Started from 1992, the Ukrainian governmental machine, all of the institutions, they were still parts of the Soviet system. The structure was also Soviet. The procedures, the regulations, the standards, the education of the staff have also still been Soviet, and based on the Soviet ideas, the Ukrainian laws and Ukrainian constitution was Soviet as well. That is very important for all of us today. We always saying that it was really bad, we felt really bad under the Soviet rule. Why the reforms is very important part of the work of the World Bank. What were those reforms about? Because we're never talking about the de-Sovietization of Ukraine. The first mission in 1992, the first mission that has turned 30 years now, as the first mission has provided the first recommendations on the future project of Ukraine. On the thought of the mission, there was no need on educational project because the level of literacy was 99%. Then we didn't understand the lack of legacy, the lack of literacy of population on democratic processes, and that was not in the mandate of the World Bank. Then should we be now surprised that the society still supported the strong governmental vertical? They still wanted the strong hierarchical connections. Right now, we're providing the most help for the state and economical policy to rebuild and to support Ukrainian values. And we only work with recommendations right now, but we still have no doubts right now that we sometimes might face the unclear or unbearable political pond. We are really helpless in between the crises because the decisions are made by the political parties that are the copies of the Soviet Communist Party, and they're not fulfilling any duties of the democratic ruling. International donors of Ukraine, together with the World Bank, they do not collaborate with the political parties because it's about the politics. But devil hides in details. So there is politics, which is the political struggle, and policy, which basically means strategy of the federal development. And I do understand the desire of dealing with politics, but why in the 30 years we do not have a single political party that will create the competitive policies? Ukrainian political parties have been created since the collapse of the Soviet Union, when we had one totalitarian party for decades. So it's quite clear why we do not have the democratic parties in Ukraine. It's quite clear why they're copying and duplicating the decisions of the Communist Party and the way they make their decisions. And we haven't created the systems of preparing people for the state ruling. We haven't prepared the people who will be able to rule the democratic Ukraine. It's not only about the professional institutions, but we've only been developing our stuff in the political parties. Who are the ones who are creating the governmental institutes? We're building the coalitions in the world. Who, for example, we have in the UK right now. So we have also the change of the political government. It is all about people from the political parties. Right now, people in Ukraine still believe that being not belonging to a party is still good, but all of the decisions are made by the political parties. The war that has started 8 years ago has proven that there is a need for evolution and for Ukrainians. We are now following these NATO standards in our army, and this creation has started from the very beginning. Now, the success gives us the opportunities to speak about the need to repeat the same path after the victory, not to improve the Soviet point of view, but to create the new institutions, create the civil administration, just as well as we created the military administrations. The most important, Her Majesty's Civil Service was the most important because the results of the works of this services has impacted the buildings of all of the countries in the Commonwealth. I do believe that the World Bank is only one policy thinker in Ukraine, full-fledged, because not all of them are available for Ukraine. To use this resource is important for all of us, and this is the great leverage that we have been undermining. The World Bank has to be the coordinator for the support of Ukraine for restoration. The coordinators, as we have now Rammstein format for the defense. I am sure that if Bank is going to be bolder in collaboration, then that will be beneficial for both Ukraine and Bank and the whole civilized world. Thank you for your attention.
Я дуже дякую вам за таку
Thank you
надихаючу
very much.
вступну
Thank you very much for this very
коментували
inspiring intro.
новий
So, Roman, did you like this idea to become the
для
Rammstein?
економіки у
To
вигляді
become the
безпекового
Rammstein, but for the economy to become, for the World Bank to
Доброго дня.
become the same as a Rammstein format
Чути
for
мене?
economy.
Чути мене?
Yes, hello, Maria. Hello, the participants of the seminar. Can you hear me well? Yes, let me just, like, for example, I will just introduce you first, maybe. So we have our distinguished guest today, and I'm really happy that we have three distinguished speakers for the discussion. We have three people representing the big financial institutions. So first of all, there was Roman Gacher, who is the alternate executive director for Ukraine at the World Bank. We also have Vladislav Rashkovan, the alternative executive director for Ukraine at the International Monetary Fund, and Artem Shevalyov, who is alternate board director for Ukraine in EBRD, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And my name is Maria Repko, the Deputy Director of the Center for Economic Strategy. Just to speak about the format, right now we will have 45 minutes for the discussion. And as I've already told my colleagues, I'm going to repeat it once again. I would like to offer you the three blitz rounds. For the first, from the very beginning, we'll start to discuss what we used to have, what was their discussion overall there, and what were the 30 years of our collaboration. Then there's going to be the second round and the most acute question, the question of war, and how the international organizations are currently helping or could help Ukrainian people and Ukrainian state. And in the round three, we're going to start to talk about the future on what Ukraine and what our allies can do.
для панелістів. Я заохочую вас
Also, for the panelists, I would like to ask you to respond to what your colleagues are going to be saying. So maybe after the first round, if we will have some time, then we will go into take some of the comments from your side or the comments from the audience. Maybe you will start a very interesting our discussion inside of our panel groups. And I also have some questions that people have voiced out during the registration process. And we have some questions from Zoom as well. So I do hope that we will have more questions coming as the discussion goes. And I would like to ask to write your questions in the chat, and Slava, the communication manager for our center, he's going to send me the questions, and I'm going to read those questions out the final 15 minutes of our meeting today. So first of all, I would like to start with Roman Kachur, the alternate director for World Bank mission to Ukraine. So tell us, when the trees were still young, when the World Bank has come to Ukraine, how it all felt. Can you hear me well? Thank you, Maria. Yes, okay.
Дякую за цю можливість.
Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's a pleasure for me to participate in this event. And for sure, 30 years ago, Ukraine has started its way together with the International Monetary Fund and with the World Bank. Two of my students have agreed to help me, and they've prepared a small research on how did it happen. They've had an interviews with different people who were connected to those people, with Vera Nanivska and with Evelyn Hopkins, who was the executive director at World Bank at that point of time, and she was also responsible for the mission from the World Bank to Ukraine. So if I may, I would like to share the screen with this presentation and to briefly give you the context with the help of this presentation. So if you do not mind, I will turn the presentation on. Can you see the presentation, I hope?
Презент, але воно не йде на весь екран, правильно? Ви не бачите весь.
Ви можете зробити
Отак,
слайд-шоу
ви
Well, you
і
can turn the slideshow on and you can, yes.
Отже, 90, чому Україна, власне,
So,
приєдналася?
why Ukraine has joined the program of the World Bank and at what moment did we start it all? Before the proclamation of independence of Ukraine on the 24th of August 1991 and before the referendum took place on the 1st of December 1991, our international partners, they haven't considered Ukraine as a separate country. Ukraine has been considered as a certain structure, as a part of the Soviet Union, and all of the issues of the external, of the foreign policies have been resolved through Moscow and through Russia. Even though at that point of time the economy of Ukraine has built one of the biggest in the USSR, but we all know that all of the sectors, they still were managed in a Soviet way. So basically, since Ukraine has proclaimed the referendum at the 1st of December 1991, the World Bank has started the very first collaboration with Ukraine. At that very moment, all of the collaboration and all of the communications had been done through the embassy of Ukraine in Moscow. So that was the first contact that had been made there, and there was a contact, there was idea that the first mission that Vera Nanivska has mentioned is going to visit Ukraine, and this is what happened on the 19th of December 1992. So basically, the month and a half after Ukraine has proclaimed its independence on the referendum. Most of the work has been done through the Embassy of Ukraine in Moscow, and starting on the 6th of February, you can see that there was a different dynamics. Ukraine has sent official applications to become the application, send the application letter. So the first office of the World Bank was in the hotel, in the hotel room in the National Hotel, as Vera Nanivska has said. And during this first visit, it was really hard for us to explain to Ukrainian government of what World Bank is, why do you need it, and how you're going to be collaborating with uh, altogether. As all of the people from this mission mentioned, most of the cabinets and most of the offices they went to, they've had Lenin portraits there, and all of the formats were just the same. They've had the people sitting there, the minister, a lot of other people, and everyone was really sitting there, being really moody, and the dialogue was really emotionally hard. On the 24th of June 1992, Ukrainian parliament has ratified the membership agreement between the World Bank and Ukraine. And since this moment, there has been an official mandate for the government to start the procedures, the joining procedure. In the very same time, the International Financial Corporation, which is also the part of the World Bank, has come with it, and also 2 new missions to Ukraine, just for them to know how they can help the newly created Ukrainian government. And it has been identified at this point of time that the small privatization is going to be one of the priorities. Thus, Ukraine has formally joined World Bank on the 3rd of September 1992. That's very interesting that the agreement has been signed in the Blue Hall of the on the White House Blue Room, but we know that this is a very good sign that this agreement has been signed in the White House, even though the World Bank is international institutions. We understand the role of the U.S. in this process. Valery Pedachenko, the former Minister of Finance, has been the signee from Ukraine, and Oleh Relation, who was the deputy minister, who was the citizen of Canada, the MIT professor at that point, who was the deputy minister of finance at that point. That was really hard to imagine. The post-Soviet Ministry of Finance, and I also worked there, and we worked with Artem Shavalov there as well. And there's many things that are still left very Soviet. I cannot even imagine the MIT professor and the deputy of on the position of the deputy of the Minister of the Finance in 1992. That was hard for me to imagine. Then Ukraine joined the so-called Dutch group. That was very easy because the Holland was ready to pay instead of Ukraine, the founding capital, and then with that help, it has definitely influenced how Ukraine has joined the group. The official statute documents have been signed a year later, and it's already in the room of the World Bank. And you can see that the second person on the second row is Aline Halsfin, who has been the acting director from Holland, the group that has Ukraine has joined. The first project, so since that, the work has started really briefly. The first missions have already came to see Kiev. They have created the constant office. Basically, at that moment, our co-workers were any person that knew English. So that was a specific interface of collaboration with the Ukrainian government. So the first credits were about the development of the cultural capacities, the restoration of the hydro energy, the restoration of the energy, and the closure of the coal mines. So as you can know, then most of the projects that have started in 1992, they are still quite relevant, and the bank is supporting them as much as it can. So we had a full change of the cabinet of ministers in October, and we've had these ministers coming there, and there was Viktor Panzanik as a vice prime minister in Kuchma's government. And what's very interesting that Kuchma, being the part of the executive, he understood why it is important for Ukraine to have a self-reliant system, financial system. Up till then, all of the calculations about the external operations and foreign operations have been controlled by Moscow. Moscow has controlled the rates, and Moscow had controlled the transfer of the incomes, and they controlled everything. So basically, throughout a couple of months, we have built the capacities for the Ukrainian central bank in a couple of months, and we have started basically the very first independent collaborations in our foreign economic activities by using the Central Ukrainian Bank. Well, that's very easy about what was going on by that moment of time. We have passed already a lot of that. So this is 100 out of 100 credits that and loans that that the World Bank has helped Ukraine with. We have worked in different sectors, more than 12 billion hryvnias, the overall amount of money that have been allocated by the World Bank to National Bank, and I'm going to be discussing the role that the World Bank plays right now. But in 30 years, it's really hard to imagine any sector of Ukrainian economy that hasn't been supported by the World Bank, by consultations or by financial support.
Романе, дуже
Thank
дякую.
you.
Це було супер
Thank
цікаво,
you.
чудово
Thank you, Roman. That was very interesting. And I really like this portrait, Lenin portraits on the walls, the one that you have sent, people who are asking the World Bank. That was a very nice memory. So let me pass the floor to Vladislav Rashkovan, who is the alternate director for the International Monetary Fund. Vladislav, did you know about the Lenin portraits? Have you seen that in the offices as well? Did people ask you what the International Monetary Fund is when the collaboration between Ukraine and this fund has started? Maria, thank you very much for inviting me, first of all. And thank you very much for inviting me to this really nice, distinguished panel. I always like that because I'm always having this photo when we meet with Roman. I think that I will start with a couple of reflections to what Roman has said and to what you have said and to what already been said before. So you have said that Roman is the executive alternate director for Ukraine, and then Artem alternate board director for Ukraine, and I'm just alternative executive director. We're not alternative director for Ukraine, we're all just the alternate executive directors. We are represented in the fund or in the European Bank or in the World Banks. We are representing other countries as well. Roman, how many countries do you represent
13
right
країн
now?
зараз.
13. 13. Artem, how many countries do you have now? 7. 7. And I have 16. So it's not just about Ukrainians representing only Ukraine, but we are representing 7, 13 countries there, and of course Ukraine as well. So we have the same positions, and that is a very good opportunity for Ukrainians to represent other countries in the world as well. Then you remember that Nina has said, Vera has said that we felt like aliens in the very beginning of 90s. But I have had a different story for I think one of the people from the IMF, when he has joined IMF in 1986 or 87, that was just like 2 years before that, he retired. And he has been working in the in the IMF for 37 years. So then he told me when I went there with a PhD with the European University, I could go to any country in the world as a young professional, to any developing country, and to feel like an alien there, as Vera has said, because no one was aware of what am I saying, because they didn't have the knowledge, because the level of the knowledge was really, really bad. Because, you know, they might have said, there was a lot of things that they could said having the opportunity for have this institutional support of the fund. We have to acknowledge that a lot of countries all over the world throughout the 30 years, and Ukraine as well, to have this really long way of constitutional restoration, so we do not need to be told of what IMF or World Bank is. We have a lot of people who have been working with international institutions for longer periods of time. But there has to be a small add-on, trying to presuppose your questions. The IMF, 90% of the time, even 92% of the time, they work with only two institutions of Ukraine, the National Bank and the Ministry of Finance. But then, for example, when we've had these programs for a broader financial support, it has been the IMF asks for land reform or privatization or the pension reforms, for example, for the fund of the state property. They don't understand the IMF language well there. I cannot say that they're still back to 1992, but they're not that prepared. They're not that prepared compared to the National Bank and the Ministry of Finance. Vera Ivanivna has also said about as also said with the first people working right now when I have been meeting them as well, what needed to be said, and this is just an idea about the IMF. No one has made their career in Ukraine. Speaking about the IMF professionalism, the people who have been working for Poland, they've made their career. People who have been working on for other Eastern European countries, they made it. In Ukraine, unfortunately, we don't have people who have finalized it. Yes, there was a lot of issues, but why should we talk about that? Roman has mentioned the very first days of the program and the program from the International Bank. The first report from the IMF on Ukraine has been has been bad. And I would like to remind you that we had this Deutsche Bank reports about the former Soviet Union republics, and Ukraine was shown as a country number one that is going to be successful if we're talking about the potential collapse of the Soviet Union. But in the same time, that was about thinking. And Roma has mentioned today that everything that has been through Moscow, the first report of the IMF about Ukraine has been printed in English and Russian. And that's a very interesting thing. And I do believe that a lot of you have read about those times when in the Bush administration at the very end of 80s, they have been thinking about the potential collapse of the Soviet Union, and they were thinking in what way they should they collaborate with the republics. And they had the two approaches there. The first approach was that Russia is going to stay the center of this communication, and we need to work through Moscow. And they didn't understand what is the connection between Ukraine and other republics as to Moscow. And unfortunately, the first point of view has won, and multiple organizations have worked through Moscow and through the mediation of Moscow. So that is why all of the international corporations have had their offices there. The Big Four, New York Times, CNN, they've all been working through Moscow. That was an important choice at that point. We understand it was a wrong one, but that has been a conscious choice of the West. Speaking about what Vera said, and responding to what Vera said when she said that the program of the World Bank has been the program of the reform. That's one of the things that I've heard from her. And this is something that I've also always said, that the programs that have been financially supported by the IMF, those are the program of the economical reforms, and basically those are the programs of the governments that are financially supported by the IMF. That's not the IMF programs per se. But the people have told me that the IMF programs, the reforms that have been offered by the IMF, they didn't work. And when I'm asking them, how do you know that? Not a single program of IMF has not been closed. The IMF, and I don't know if you have calculated all of those figures, Maria, so IMF could have provided Ukraine with more than $80 billion throughout the 30 years of our collaboration, around $80 billion. There's not a single other organization that would have the same level of commitment, that would provide the same level of commitment on this amount of money. We only received 39 billions out of it, just a half of it. So we made half of it. We made half of what we have promised to IMF, and we received half of the money. But the thing is that most of the programs, they we had front loaded with money. So we had money in advance. So we've had this money. We have had this first and second reading, and we have this where the curve of the third iteration. We have had this, we had the 4 iterations since the last program of the IMF, but I'm working with Georgia, for example, they had 12 iterations, but in Ukraine, we never had that. And in order to close this part on history, I just wanted to say that the IMF role in these questions is to take Ukraine out of the hole when Ukraine has been caught into, and to bring up for the EBRD, for IMF, for the other financial organizations to bring the ideas and provide them the support, to provide them the framework for the further on collaborations with the other organizations, to provide them the framework for the cost of the private money so that the private money would start working with the country. And I am talking about that, the Washington pool. That's what Roman has said about the Washington role as well. But all of the investors know that if there is the IMF program there to support, that means that IMF is always there backing up and will support the country if there will be problems, that will comfort the private entrepreneurs, and they will also comfort IMF and EBRD and other organizations. And I would like to stop with that. Yes, thank you, Vlad. And we've already taken more time than I have provided from the first part, but we had a very interesting experience that we have to talk about as well. The problem connected to the other types of support. I would like to ask Artem Shevelyov, the deputy head, not only for Ukraine, but the deputy head for all of the uh, EBRD. So how was it hard for you? What was challenging for you? What would be the lesson learned from your chemical company's point of view? Yes, thank you, Maria. As already my colleagues have said, it is a pleasure for me to see everyone. And, we have this certain tradition to talk and discuss about everything, but the 30 years of collaborating with international financial organizations is definitely a very important date. The EBRD, it's slightly easier and slightly more complicated. Slightly more complicated because formally EBRD is mostly the banking international financial institutions. The World Bank is called to bank, but basically it's kind of almost the state-like organizations. EBRD, even though it has the status of the international financial institution, it operates as a commercial bank mostly that supports the reforms and helps you to go to the market economy to certain countries, but the one that focuses on the development of the private sector. In case of Ukraine and some other states of this region, Ukraine is very interesting the case in this region because this legacy from Soviet and Russian, but Soviet structure of economy, while the state sectors had its prevalence, this experience has been really, really hard to search for the projects in the private sector. So that is why I followed the statistics, and for 30 years, in 30 years, the private sector is only 40% of the cumulative portfolio. But still, it has provided us, the EBRD, helped the EBRD to be very instrumental about the changes that happened. So basically, this more than 12 billion euro that EBRD has invested in Ukraine throughout this year. So it's helped us to support the very strong changes. We cannot recall those changes now, for example. For example, I've tried to figure out what was the changes 22 years ago. 22 years ago, we've had the negotiations on the energy prices, but I think everyone has already forgotten that. But there was the end of 90s, beginning of 2000s, and the level of the invoices was pretty high, and it was not the market tariffs, but the participation of those kind of actors as EBRD and the World Bank that was strongly participating there. It helped us to provide a more market-based pricing there. And there have been a lot of multiple examples on that. Later on, we had some challenges and have some changes about the development of the business ombudsman that was after the Maidan already year 2014, 2013. There has been some reforms and some ideas about the corporate reformations in the public service, but other things as well. Those were the things that EBRD had this opportunity to be the The EBRD has this opportunity to give the investments where the where the reform is possible. So basically, when we had some ideas with the budget financial and all of the things connected to that, then the EBRD is trying to do that while collaborating with individual companies. And we've worked in the private sector by supporting those private actors that are promoting the best practices, and they are helping the better change to happen. As of now, we have the operational portfolio with almost $100 million, and unfortunately, we're still working with the private sector. But on the other hand, it gives the EBRD to promote this idea of the reforms, the ones that we have been fighting for so many years already. I've tried to be very, very brief. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, Masha, can I add up just 2 words to what Evan? Yes, yes, please. Roman has mentioned Mr. Havrilation, and Mr. Havrilation have been the first director, the first deputy in our office, in our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he has been working in the IMF for many years. Unfortunately, he died 2 years ago, 2 years ago in 2021. And Vera also has mentioned the issues about the politics, about the desovetization. Of course, though, we never had the word desovetizations in the report, at least the IMF reports, but multiple things that were reforms, they have been directed and targeted to desovetization as it is. But, for example, when the IMF as organization does not understand at all, this is the policy of economy. That is the big question that have been raised, not only by the economists, but I'm sure that any kind of government should make that decision because that if it's not going to be re-elected, it's their problems. So that's one of the points. And the third thing that you've said, Masha, about the portraits of Lenin. Yesterday we had a conference with Uku, and Anya Novosad has said that she was talking about some kind of schools that Russians have occupied in certain cities, and they were taking down the Ukrainian portraits, and they have been only putting up the portraits of the Russians and Russian authors. Okay, thank you very much, Vlad. Please do not leave because we have the first question for the second round to you. I know I already have very heated messenger box coming, so there is some questions to Vladislav Rachkovan as well on what the IMF does to help Ukraine throughout the wartime. So there's many questions throughout our chat because you are very strong and powerful institutions, and you have said there has been 80 nearly billions pledged and only 39 dispersed. So as this very moment, the program of the IMF has been discussed very actively. Everyone is looking forward to it. We don't see it yet, but we don't understand when and how it's going to happen. But we understand that Ukraine needs this money right now. This is basically one of the news as our today's news that IMF is going to be planning to discuss the emergency assistance for Ukraine, and this is going to be done before the winter meetings of the foundation of the fund. But if you can say of what is going to be, what the IMF is going to be doing right now, so that Ukraine will feel itself in financial support, if not in the financial security, but in with financial support. Masha, you know me for a longer period of time, and you know that I do not comment upon the negotiation process between IMF and Ukraine. You have the representatives of government who can do that. For me, as far as I am inside of this process, so I cannot comment on the negotiations. But what can I say? IMF has been the first one who has started support with on the war. The first meeting that was had was the European Investment Bank. On the 2nd of March, they have approved the change of specification for some certain money and transactions in order to provide the money. But they have been providing this money on the 20th of March. The foundation has met Ukraine on the 23rd of February. We had the beginning of mission for the second iteration of our program that has been there at this time. We had very optimistic views on how it's going to be iterated, and everything was very optimistic on promises that have been provided to us. But unfortunately, on the 24th, the situation has changed dramatically. But on the 7th, just remind me, Roman, on the 7th of March, the World Bank also had a meeting to to support the program for Ukraine. And on the 9th of March, the IMF had the same meeting. But the money has been there because, the IMF gives the money on the very same day. We've had the money in Ukraine on the 9th of March. There was $1.4 billion. The people who know how IMF works, they understand that starting from the very beginning of the idea till the execution, basically it's sending money to Ukraine or any other country, it will take 15 weeks. if everything goes as it goes. So it has been done in a week, while an average time is 15 weeks. So that's a lot, and that's very important. So we are opening the doors for all of the others, the one who's sending the signal that the foundation is by our side and other countries can also join us. So that was the first thing to keep in mind. But that was a long time ago. But what have we done since? We have opened the so-called administrative accounts. We had 2.5 billion, 1 billion from in grants from Germany and 1.5 billion Canadian dollars, which is a loan from Canada. The World Bank is also using their instrument, their tools, and they're working with the US and with the other countries where they can achieve money. So what did the IMF do as well? And Христина Georgieva personally has said, and and right now we have that we need $1.5 billion of financial support a month, and that is something that has been heard. And when we are certifying this kind of money, then we're starting to work. Unfortunately, we never have received 5 billion each month, even though that Roman and Artem, we are the members of the working group that deals with that. So of course, it was not enough. We have been also working during summer on the rechanneling from all of the RDRs. So for the big amounts of money, there's a lot of political and technical problems that we were not able to figure out, but we will be working on that as well. There were a couple of moments that you've said as well, and I don't know what was the resources that you were referring to, Maria. The business news. The business news, I will tell you the name of the media outlet in a second. Ukraine Business News Morning Economic Digest. This is something that they send every morning. Okay, I don't know if I'm not going to be now giving up some of the news or something, but a couple of the things I wanted to comment. And we had this informal board of IMF board on launching the new window for the European financial instrument that will give us the access to $1.44 billion. And I'm sure that we're going to have it, but not to give you the precise dates, but throughout months, less than throughout in a month. This is the first thing that I wanted to mention. The second thing is that I am sure that we're going to have some issues about the bigger program. We're going to be working on that as well. I'm not going to give out all of the secrets and I can get into the details of these negotiations, but I've just joined you from the meetings between the president and the IMF representatives. Again, I don't know if that's in the public sector already, but this is something that has already been discussed and there is a support plan that we are following right now. And the third thing that you have also mentioned, the economical Rammstein meeting, this is the one that I've used today when we had this briefing with the president. There is one problem. I really like this idea of the economical Rammstein, and I really like this idea. I do hope that the IMF and the World Bank can be this kind of economical platform as Rammstein is for military decisions right now. But I do believe that the center of the economical Rammstein should be in the J7, because the J7, through their representatives in the World Bank, EBRD, in the European Investment Bank, and through the European Union, the J7 can impact, well, not politic-wise, but through this decision-making process in these institutions, they can impact all of that. Then there's also, let us keep in mind one of the things that we haven't spoke about yet. The EBRD, EMF, and the World Bank, they're providing loans. They have some grants to the poor countries, but we're not a poor country. So the question is that we need grants, but not loans. And grants can be provided by the budget of the countries that have to include this in the budget. This is J7 plus country, like Netherlands plus Netherlands and some other countries as well. So we have to understand that as well. The IMF will be there by our side. IMF is going to be playing the leading role here as well. Let us keep in mind the J7, we're going to G7, we're going to have money, we're going to have it in place, we're going to have one amount of money and then the other. Thank you, Roman. Artem, what about the EBRD? What the EBRD does? And a separate question additionally to your description of the programs, in what way would you structure the restoration funds? And if you can talk about that as well, because I do know that you have been dealing with this too. Yes, thank you, Maria. Well, let me start with then putting an emphasis to a different part of it. So Roman has spoken a lot about the issues of coordination and the concept of the economical or financial Rammstein has been already circulating in our spaces for longer than a month already. And I would like to share with you that I do not see the big progress on that yet. That's basically the very old tradition, and you can say that's all because of us, and it's all because of the government and bureaucracy. But what has been really shocking for me and what has been really frustrating for me as well, that would be the very low level of responsibility from the side of our European and American colleagues, of course, from the first side of our European colleagues. I'm really sorry for saying that, but I'm trying to be very, very direct about that. Yes, of course, everyone supports us. Yes, of course, there is a lot of support that we get, but unfortunately, the coordination level, even those 5 billion a month that we have already spoken for 5 or 6 months in a row, all of that is just from the very same game. So we have no opportunity to turn the political proclamations into the real executive work. What we really need is to build the economical platform like Rammstein. I would also call that in a different way, maybe, but we need to have the constant contacts with our colleagues from the J7 and from the biggest and the most important countries of Europe. Because what we have right now, we have a lot of duties, we have a lot of very serious, and there were some practical things some people have already discussed it in the parliament, some people have discussed it in the Ministry of the Finance. But as Vlad has said, when IMF is in a week or in a couple of weeks are completing all of their processes, the EBRD has approved that 2 billion program in less than 2 weeks, when usually they do that from 6 to 18 months. And the ministry, and I'm not going to be mentioning the ministry of this specific country, but for example, Ministry of the Finance of one of the J7 countries, they cannot make the needed documents for 7 months to give the financial support of 2 million billions, and that's very, very sad. And who should be the main person in this case? The answer is going to be the seven. Well, basically, okay, that will be eight. So it's like 7 countries plus European Commission. So here in this case, we always have the bad idea because some people have their own agenda. For example, the US, they see the situation from their point of view. Then the European Commission, they see the situation in their own way, and Berlin or London have their own agenda. How to get it all together, I have no idea yet. I do understand that without the leadership position of Ukraine, we will not be able to stand still. And I do believe that I might be very, very strong in this question, but we have to have this strength here. We need to have a certain level of professionalism as well. So we have to say, we shouldn't not say just we have the Ministry of the Finance and the Ministry of the Finance is responsible for everything. Of course, you cannot say that because the ministries of finances have worked on their internal problems as well. So we will be thinking about that, but it's quite sure for us we will have to get this coordination to the new level because either will not succeed or we will to communicate in the public sector, and then we will have the joint accusations with no results. Then we do have a new resource on the 25th of October. There will be a meeting in Berlin. So basically, there will be the continuation of what has been done in Lugano. And so we have a month, slightly more than a month. So that is why it is important to get everyone together straight away and just to talk and say that we need to have a very specific results and very specific expectations, because in Lugano, we've had this topic said because everyone has said important things about that. But in most of directions, we didn't have the real moment.
Артем, дуже дякую. Насправді мені тут мої вищі сили
Artem, thank you very
допомагають
much. My
трошечки
higher powers have
продовжити
told me that we can even prolong our
переговори про
communication
стосунки.
because we have already are out
От
of time.
тому я
But I was
запрошую Романа
given the
Качура
permission to
передати
continue.
тобі
So I would like to ask
слово
Roman
по
Kacher
суті
to
нашої
mention
недавньої
from
підготовки
your
та
position and from the
презентації
position of the
із
World Bank. I know that you have a
найбільш
lot of
зараз найбільш актуальних
projects and assistant
цього
projects, what are working right now, what are the most effective right now, and what should we do now more to help Ukraine stand firmly and to win the war. Yes, thank you, Maria. First of all, I would like to start with saying of what has happened since February 24th and how the World Bank has responded to the situation that started on the 24th of February. The 24th of February, when it just all started, the very same day, the World Bank has made a decision that we're going to be continuing supporting Ukraine. We have known that Ukraine is going to stand firmly and we can continue working with Ukraine as one of the most responsible parties. On the 7th of March, just for you to understand, we've already had the session for the directors board when we have had the first project on the symbolical title Peace. So basically, there was more than $700 million that have been mobilized, and half of this amount of money has been already transferred to Ukraine the very next day. The World Bank has been one of the first international financial organizations, or basically the first international financial organizations that has directly said about the aggression of Russia against Ukraine. They have used the direct terminology of calling the war a war. And that's a very important moment. Being in Washington there, I can say that it's a unique thing about this kind of this type of institution. So it was unprecedented, speaking about this level of institutions and what was happening overall. So basically, we have created the first precedents of the things that have never happened before, even those small things as the fundraising campaign among the employees of the bank to support Ukraine. Not a single time before in the history of the World Bank, never had this crowdfunding for this man-made conflicts inside of the organization. So we never had it before. So it wasn't about the natural disaster. And when for the very first time I've met the person who was responsible for this fundraising, the first words that this person said was like, it's impossible. Throughout the 6 months, we have heard this multiple times from different people on the different levels of the bank. And it was very interesting for us to know that on the third or fourth month, we know it's impossible, but, and then we have started the normal conversation. So just to get back on the fundraising campaign, we have started the fundraising campaign. It was the most generous campaign in the history of the bank throughout 80 years. This is the money that is going to be provided for Ukrainians. Since the first peace project that has already been provided from the 7th of March. In April, we had our annual meetings for the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank in Washington. The Prime Minister has participated in these meetings on behalf of Ukraine, and we had the first number that has been voiced as $5 billion a month, the need of Ukraine, the thing that Vlad has also mentioned, and we had the round table there with the participation of more than 50 participants, starting from the vice prime minister and the ministers levels, to find the money to support Ukraine. Well, basically, from the period when the war has started, the World Bank has mobilized more than $80 billion, almost $8 billion, 9.5, 8. So understanding all of the money that has been delegated to Ukraine, then 54 cents out of every dollar has been transferred through the trust accounts of the World Bank. Of course, we're talking about the money of the partners. There's a lot of money from the US that have been transferred with the support of the World Bank. There has been the money from the UK and the guarantees that have been mobilized by the World Bank. And as I've already said, there's a lot of rules and procedures have been fully reviewed and changed. Just for you to understand, in June we had the most critical situations, and if you were following, um, then we had a bit deficiency and we had a bit problems overall. And you know that the financial systems have stopped in Ukraine. So the money has been provided by the US aid, and US aid has signed the agreement. They've had signed this agreement up in 2 o'clock in the night, in the morning, and then the money has been completed through the Chase Bank, through these. And 11 o'clock in the morning, Ukrainian time, the money has been already allocated to Ukraine. So you cannot even imagine that the top management of the US aid and the banking system comes during the night just to reactivate a transaction. That's definitely unprecedented things that have never been done before. And in June, we had a different loan that has been approved, and also it has a symbolical title, peace. So we've had it had a lot of money from the partners, and we're also providing the partners our reports on using of this money. That's a very important tool for the people, because we understand that the capacities of government in this situation is really limited to work with the different numbers of the counterparts. So we are collaborating with the donors. We are packing all of this money into one single package, and we are as one-stop shop. We're providing all of this money to the executives in need. So this is basically very briefly about the collaboration, our collaborations during the war. Speaking about the restoration support. So can we speak about that right now, or you will then go through that later on? Yes, let us start with that straight away. Let us start with that straight away, because basically that would have been the next question to you, because we know that the World Bank is very successful. So in collecting the money and and providing all the monies that is needed, and no one has repeated this experience. And thank you very much for every one of you for making all of this support real. But what would be the benefits, and what would be the benefits of that? How can we scale it up? How can we make the most successful donating funds as one as that you've had with as one that you have had working with overall with the blueprint that you've had? What would be the question that would be discussed, and what would be your further actions further on? But yeah, just to say, to have any kind of crowdfunding, we need to have the common ground. We need to have the common ground. We need to have the situation evaluated. So basically, the World Bank, together with the European Union, together with the government of Ukraine, has now prepared already the RDNA reports, Rapid Damage and Needs Assessment. If you haven't had the opportunity to read it out, I would like to offer you to do that, because you can take a look at this at the World Bank site. On the 9th of September, we have presented this report publicly. We have presented it together with the European Commission. Just for your very brief understanding, the direct impact that has been done by Russia from the beginning of the war to the 1st of June is around $100 billion. The economical impact is $250 billion. So this is the money that we need for the restoration and renovation of everything that has been destroyed since the 24th of February and up till June is $350 billion. $105 billion that have been identified by the World Bank. That is something that we need to achieve in the restoration of the next 18 months. That is unbelievable money, and we had the minimum evaluations in our reports. We will have the updated versions of the report that will be increased, that will be updated as well, because we understand the war is ongoing and there is still the expenses and the losses that Ukraine has. If we will compare it to the GDP that we've had before the war, and if we will just say and presuppose that the 10% of GDP might be the 10% of budget will be provided for the capital investment, we would need almost 100 years to restore it on our own. So, half a year of losses and then a century of restoration. Of course, we cannot have this money on our own. We'll not be able to mobilize this money on our own. So that is why we're collaborating with the government to be able to prioritize. Even this 105 billion is unbelievable amounts of money from the point of view of the government's opportunity, even to use that in the very short framework of time. So right now we have prioritized $17 billion that are needed for the faster restoration and for the faster restoration up till 2027. And just to be able to operate this money, we are now finalizing the creation of the trust funds, and we'll have a symbolical title for this trust fund. It will be the Dream. Uh, the multi-dollar trust recovery fund for institutions and infrastructure. We are now working on developing on creating it with the multiplier function. So for each dollar that will be provided by donors, so that we would be able to multiply it to create it into $2 or $3 that Ukraine can use. So starting from Friday, the 9th of September, we've started collecting the money. We do hope that we will have this opportunity to continue these collections during the annual meetings of the World Bank and IMF. So we wanted to have the very same collection as we've had in April on the level of the central bank's directors and our colleagues, the donors. So basically giving them the opportunity to explain the situations and to have the certain pledges and liabilities from their side as well. So some comments. I do believe that that we're building the two platforms right now. The platforms that is going to be created by the World Bank and the trust funds. This is something that we know has been very effective, or at least in the first 6 months of the war. In my point of view, the European Commission that are also going to have the coordination platform, we will have certain coordination between the donors, but we will have certain competition as well. Understanding our previous experience, we will not be able to avoid that, but I hope for better and prevailing coordination. Then, unfortunately, we see different evaluations from the government, and there's the different negotiations that we and the evaluations that we've had seen and voiced out in Lugano. Then we've had different in the Arginea. Then we had this another presentations for the ambassadors of the international organizations in the president's office, and unfortunately, their evaluations are different. But let us hope that in the most recent times, that in the recent days, we will have some certain coordination in place and we will have these figures approved so that we would have the united and single joint center of decision making from the side of Ukraine.
Дякую дуже,
Thank you.
Романе.
Thank you. Thank you, Roman.
Які
Vlad,
плани в
what would
МВФ,
be
який
the
може бути формат участі
IMF
в
plan?
роботі
What would be the
Центрального
format
банку
of the
України,
IMF
розуміємо, можливо,
participation in the
будь-яка
restoration of Ukraine funds? I don't understand it might not be the
сфері
problem, but maybe that will be the certain conditionalities for reforms or technical support. So what would be the role that you see yourself in? Yes, thank you very much. First thing that I wanted to do, I would like to also speak about what Roman has said, but the first thing that I wanted to say but I wanted to say that I've mentioned Vera's name the wrong way. But the thing is that when IMF has launched this administrative account that was in March, why we used to have it as administrative accounts in IMF? Due to what Roman has said specifically, because a lot of countries have wanted to give money, but they didn't know will our government stay there. And the money in the IMF account, that would be the opportunity, for example, to get them back if there's going to be the need. And so there was some kind of, they were slightly scared they were slightly scared from this. Our partners have been slightly scared if Ukraine should stand longer or no. So that was really, really fast because, you know, the Ukrainians and the armed forces of Ukraine, they have shown that they're basically very standing strong. And so right now, this administrative accounts is not that needed that much. Then the main function is to support countries throughout these tools, you know, to collect money when they have the big problems in some countries. So IMF is not a development bank. So that is why what is important for us. And well, first of all, we are starting to collaborate first because we need to make this base, this platform, this macro framework so that everyone would be there, so that we would support the monetary fiscal policies, the reserves policies. We wanted we know that right now it's all like we now need to make the macro adjustments. We didn't speak about that yet, but we're not. If we have minus 35% of GDP this year, then it's not about the GDP of the 200 billion country that really wanted to grow, that planned its expenses and investments on the idea that, for example, we will grow for 2% growth. We are the country with the 35% decrease of the GDP. And we need to make some macro adjustments of what you can do under the certain conditions that you have based on the subsidies, based on the social trust, based on the other ideas. You cannot, if we have lost a part of our income, then you cannot continue, unfortunately, to continue living as you lived before. So you have to work on that faster. So that is why it's not about the grants that we need in our country. Not we need grants. We do not need loans. The loans will kill Ukraine. We will not be able to cover so many loans as we've had before. We need to cover a lot of things that we have lost. And Roman has shown it in the best way that after the 6 months of war, we need to have 100 years of restoration if we will do that on our own. But I'm sure that the World Bank and all of the other international financial organizations will help us to receive all of the money needed for the restoration of the country after the war. What Roma has said about our fundraising in the World Bank, the one thing that I wanted to add up to that, I just wanted to say that we have Vitaly Dubel, who is the head of the associations of the employees of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and we worked together on creating this fundraising fund inside of our organizations. And I fully agree to what Roman has said, because in IMF, we've also collected the biggest amount of money inside of the organization. It was very hard as well. And we also were told that it is impossible. It was possible for us to do. Then the question of language of what is being used, and we have been through this question twice at the very least. The first time in the past when Ukraine has been a part of the CIS countries and we were not able to fight it. Then you've asked about the World Economic Club. When we're using of the proper language there, it was important too. So you can find that as well because it was a joint statement by IMF on the 21st of February, when we've said that it was Russian invasion to Ukraine what has happened. But in most of the reports, the language turns to neutrality more. But right now we're working on getting the Russian invasion term back to the official language of the foundation. So we want to reshape it back to the war against Ukraine, because of course Russia is promoting their position. So just to leave it as war in Ukraine, as it used to be before, like it used to be said conflict in Ukraine. Right now Russians are saying that it's only war in Ukraine. So what you can do from your side is also promoting this language, the right language, Russian war, right? So we will not be able to receive the emergency financing, and I do hope it will be done throughout the months. And we will have to do that. We will have to do that in a very, very brief time because basically because we will have like 10 days to create a new program for Ukraine. Then we are hoping that we will be able to take our representatives back to Kiev because the person who has been abroad. We're thinking about the physical mission, organizing maybe it will be Kiev or maybe Krakow or Warsaw, because then we also have this discussion in place. I don't know if our listeners or audience know that, but there is a discussion that we have this tool, but there's thinking about this tool that's called this policy monitoring board of involvement that would be an add-on to this the staff monitoring program, and add on to that. This tool, this tool is what Ukraine needs and other countries need, the countries that are in a war. So this is the countries when the moment when there is really hard to forecast of what's going on in a couple of months, and you need to have a framework at least that is going to help you to going to provide you is going to provide some certainty for the experts that will be working inside of the organization as well, because we understand that people inside of the organization, they're also signing they're signing things, and they're also thinking about their careers as well. So I hope that is going to happen. I hope that we will have these programs in place and we're going to see that as soon as possible. I'm really sorry, I need to join a different call because unfortunately I need to, I should have been here. I should have left already. So yes, Lip, if I may, I'm going to leave. Yes, hi, my name is Lip Wyszlinski. I am the, due to the technical problems, Maria is not able to continue this discussion, so I will follow that up. So yes, thank you very much for all of your meetings. Let us then close our meeting today for the physical restoration, because you have been speaking about the World Bank, but EBRD has an historical long experience of providing the infrastructural support for Ukraine as well. What would be your vision and the vision of the bank? What will be the tools, maybe some specific tools for the financial support and the technical support for the restoration of Ukraine? Yes, thank you for this question. And all of those calculations that Roman has mentioned, this is something that we have already calculated as well as 6 months of expenses and a century of restoration. But as always goes with math, there's always some specific adjustments that the life does. The figures are terrible, but let us say, to say the very least, we have to win. We have to win. All of our conversations on the restoration and reconstruction, they're all based that we have won, and there is the moment that we should start our restoration process now. That we're starting our restorations under certain security situation that provide us for good uh, restoration processes. Anyways, whether we're talking about the grants as the financial support in tools, I do believe that maybe grants are going to be playing a very important part in the in the short-term perspective, but we cannot say that those grants are going to be dozens or hundreds million dollars, because I do not believe that's a realistic expectations to make. Why? Because we will have to explain it to other countries. The countries will need to explain it to the taxpayers as well. So, with all of the support and with all of the support that we have from Europeans or Americans, with all of that, they still have to take care of their own life as well, and they have to take care of their own country as well. So we have to have a closer consideration on that. I do believe that the perspectives of growth of Ukrainian economy are tremendous after the restoration. So there's not a single secret, or there's no very complicated recipes of what should be done. Transparency, effectiveness of the state institutions. So, the very same reforms that haven't been closed and haven't been finalized before the war. Because right now that we have a situation when we have to do everything faster. whether we will have this money available. I am completely sure that yes, we'll have this money available. And I am sure that engaging these dozens of millions of euro and dollars is not a very complicated story or very complicated process, because there are some important growth points inside of the country that will be very obvious for the resource usage. The danger actually is the danger actually is that there will be the great desire to try to restore everything in a centralized way. Understanding the share of the state in Ukrainian GDP, personally for me as an economy professional, I am bothered by the perspective that we are right now are the 60% of our GDP, we're going to get to the 80% of GDP in the debt, or even getting to the back closer to the Soviet model of economy. The state is a catalyzer of the processes, but the state cannot be the effective manager of the investment projects because it's not the main function. I do believe that collaboration with the key international organizations, especially for the ones that concentrate them attention to the agricultural processes, EBRD and other projects as well, or the World Bank in the last to the less extent, those channels of collaboration, those financial support channels, they will help us to effectively use this money and effectively engage this money. The tool that we haven't mentioned yet, and the tool that is obvious, and I'm looking at Roman right now as well, because this is from the story of the World Bank, is insurance, insuring the military risks. Because even after the war is over, we all understand that the risks will still be there, starting from the mined territories, ending up to the crazy neighbors that can bring something as well. And we need to have this protection of this investment, and this insurance program has to be there as well. And that's an important role of the state because it's commercially important. And this is non-party story. This is the state's building story. But basically, we are saying that investments have already been in place. Even right now, the EBRD itself has been supporting their businesses in the west of Ukraine, and those businesses that have been replaced from the temporarily occupied territory, and the one that have been building up the building up their production lines on the occupied territories. That's a very big signal for me that with the end of the military actions, it will only increase.
Дякую дуже, Артема. Вибачте, мені
Yes,
тут
thank you so much,
підключився
Artemis. I'm sorry
секундочку
for losing this
інтернет, тому
connection. We had some
декілька
problems with
моментів.
connection. So, Roman, do you have a comment? Yes, a very brief comment on the insurance, because in the World Bank Group, we have an organization called MIDA.
Ми провели переговори з Мігою, і зараз вони розглядають можливість створення спеціального
We have negotiated with MIGA, and right now they are developing a specific tool for the military risks insurance for Ukraine. That's a new product that they're working with, because before that they've been working with the more classical products. But on the level of serious management of MIGA, they have a clearer understanding of the serious need for this need. We understand that we're talking about the millions of dollars, and I do hope that these trust funds that we are currently creating and going to be announcing soon, that the part of the money for these funds is going to be used to finance the creation of this product and its further on use. So this project and this work has been done now, so quite soon I'm sure that we will be able to
Романе,
hear
скажіть,
some more
що
information on
додам,
that.
бо я через
Roman, that's a
питання
cosmic news, because I was not aware of that, and I am sure that a lot of people in Ukraine are looking forward to that, because we know there will be no investments. We won't have the insurance, but we'll not be able for us to insurance these risks. And I do hope that we will get back to this topic at the different events. So right now we don't have time at all. So yeah, but I wanted to ask everyone that who have written me on the IMF program, scale program, and How do we see that? What would be the terms of that? How it all will work out? And I would like to start with a different question to all of the three of our panelists, and that's going to be quite a provocative one, I would say. So Russia is the member of the organizations of the International Financial Organizations member. So the colleagues are saying as well that we should push that on all of the institutions that have been created for development, not the destruction on excluding Russia's access to those financial organizations or to make them voiceless in this organization. So how the situation goes in your organizations with the Russian Federation? Okay, let me start then, because the EBRD, I think, is given the whole rhythm in these processes. Starting from 2014, since the annexation of Crimea, we have raised these questions firmly, and unfortunately, that manager didn't have this formal decision on stopping the operations in Russia. So there has been some things have been done, but since the 24th of February and the 25th, we have started the process on Article 8.3, the suspension of access to resources. So the suspension of the to access of the resources of EBRD. Yes, it's a symbolical step in a way, because it does not take away the membership voice or participation right in the executive bodies and boards, but this once again, the very first time that this article has been used, and it has been used for both Russia and Belarus. So the next step would be the cutting Russia from the EBRD membership, as well as cutting them from the access to other international organizations and membership of other organizations as well. There's one problem. These organizations have been created for the normal situation in the world. The statutes have been signed in a way and written in a way that there is not a lot of opportunities to get membership out of a country. So there's only about the big financial violations, like, for example, you're not paying the membership fee as a country. So right now we're trying to prove to our colleagues as well that the violations of the shareholder, it's not only about not paying your fees, it's also about the human rights violations and international aggression, the annexation of territories, the shelling of the territory of the other country. That's also are the violations of the statutes documents, and there's also might be the cause for stopping the membership in organizations. Still, a lot of shareholder countries in these organizations, and the situations in the EBRD is even worse than in the IMF. Unfortunately, but Russia has certain impact on the certain shareholders of the EBRD, and sometimes the voting for these issues they have been written in a way that, except for the weight of the voice, you're also thinking about the number of the votes. Of course, there is our position is supported by the J7, by European Union, and other bigger country. So we can go through this need on the percentage, but with the number of the countries who are going to support this decision, there might be a problem, because unfortunately Russia has resources to make smaller countries to vote either against this decision or to abstain, which is not for the benefit of Ukraine. And in this situation, the work continues on that, but this is the very important question. So we need to raise this question, and we need to have the positive result of that. We cannot just try, fail, and try again. So this is not this case in this question. Okay, I can't hear them, and I think that we've lost him. Yes, I think we have lost him. We have lost him, the connection as well. Okay, so Roman, I would like to ask you then. Yes, I know we have only 3 minutes till the end, so I will just try to be very brief. And as Artem said, our organizations have been created, and the principles in this and the our main documents, articles of associations, they have been made and they didn't presuppose this kind of situation. They didn't presuppose this direct war between the members of the association. So there's no specific ways of how what we should deal with that. We are we have invited the international professionals. There is an understanding that the member of organization, one of the founding members of the organization or one of the stakeholders cannot be active there if they're violating the fundamental principles of activities of this organization. But unfortunately, this procedure has not been written down in words. To be fully honest, we don't have there's no political will among the biggest members of our organization to cut Russia's membership. So we continue in this work, and as it's been said before, we have been told that something is impossible many times before, but I do believe that maybe at some point of time we will have this result that we're aiming for. The World Bank, the membership can be also stopped if the participation of the member will be stopped in the IMF or in the UN. Knowing all of the events and knowing everything that Russia has done, I do think that those decisions might be in place, and then the statute presupposes that they will be automatically deprived of membership. In experience, I wanted just to say that our Russian director has disappeared since February. He hasn't been in our bank for 6 months. Then we finally have seen him for the very first time since February in September. He has been at our board meeting, but instead of formal meetings, we also have informal meetings, a lot of informal meetings, and all of the directors from other offices, they've said that in the formal meetings they didn't want to have him in the same room. So I do want to say that there's a lot of informal things that are being done that give a clearer understanding on the position of the people, that the participation of the director on behalf of Russia is unpleasant and undesirable. What was interesting also, Evelyn Hafkin, the former director that represented Ukraine, she also said that when the Russian directors have been presenting part of our board members in Nordic countries, UK, they've just stood up and because they needed to have a coffee, for example, so they always ignored the presentation. On one hand, that's nice to hear that. On the other hand, they wanted to have something more. So I would like to ask for more comments, and I will participate. But I would like to ask Nina, Vera to close our discussion. So, do you have the opportunity to go on the same tables informally? Okay, so yeah, I think that yes, the Vlad has already left us. Okay, so yes, then Vera Tudorina, I would like to ask you to then close our discussion just to talk about the 30 years of the work of international financial organizations in Ukraine, the support that has been provided, and what should we wait in the future. So the closing words, please. Yes. Yes, you've had your sound and then on and off. I would like to ask you to be very, very brief if it's okay. Yes, the microphone. So it sounds, yes, I think we have the sound finally. It was very, very, very important for me to listen to the discussion. It was very inspiring discussion for me. Young professionals, inspiring professionals. But I would like to get back to what I've started with. And the World Bank, the IMF, the EBRD, even as well. They are the organizations. It's not just the banking organizations. So, we all have the world development in their core. So what we haven't voiced, we didn't speak about the reform agenda at all, financial agenda. So we need to have a very nice digitalization, the work that has been provided. We have a strong communication of that, but we haven't seen anything about the reforms agenda at this point. So I'm really, really scared that it will be once again a missed chance again. Then if we're not going to be finalizing our decentralization, because we have Russia and we have war, because we haven't done some of the homework in this sector before. So our parliament does not work in the full circle, in the full cycle of the policies that has been provided by the final mission by Mr. Cox. So it cannot be the legal entity. It has to be the political organization. What is the unknown grounds for us? This is something that is really scary for us because it's not something that is going to be given to us but as granted. If we will not start thinking of what would be the policies, what would be the agenda that the political parties have, but not judgment, not using the judgments, not having the position, but we have a full policies, then I do believe that if we will not have this, then I think that your center has to remember about that and think about it, consider that. We didn't have the discussion, but we had a very fantastic communication, I would say, that we have had. And if we will add up to this moment, because we need to have it as an agenda. So it's important for us to raise those questions further on as well. Thank you very much. And having that said, I would like to thank all of our panelists and participants, and I would like to also ask everyone who haven't haven't done it yet. I would like to ask you to keep on donating Ukraine and also supporting Ukraine. You can donate to the army of Ukraine, or you can use and you can choose multiple volunteering foundations that have collected money so that Ukraine can win this war. The Come Back Alive, the Laleka Foundation, for everyone who has joined us. If you really liked our event, support our army. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Thank you so much for your attention.